Welcome everyone to our third session of the day for National Ag Day Farmer Time, and we have very exciting that we're getting producers from all over Australia, and now we have Mark and Gillian Fennell from virtually the middle of Australia. Wouldn't that be nearly true?
That'd be pretty true. We're right up there. We're 120 kilometres south of the SANT border. So technically we're South Australians, but we do feel a little bit more like we belong to the middle of Australia.
Yeah, fantastic. Well, thanks so much for joining us to give your presentation today, and thanks to all the schools joining us today. So I'll hand it over to you, and thank you again.
No worries. Thank you very much. Hi, everyone. I'm Gillian, and this is my husband, Mark, and we have a beef cattle station in the far north of South Australia. So I've got a little PowerPoint, and I know PowerPoints can be pretty boring sometimes. We call them PowerPointless presentations where I come from, but it just might help kickstart a bit of discussion. And if you have any questions, you can pop them in the chat. And we're able to answer just about anything that you'd like to know. Okay, but give me a break because I just have to work out how to do this properly. There we go. So where do we live? So we live in the far north of South Australia. We're approximately 450 kilometres south of Alice Springs, 250 kilometres north of Coober Pedy, and we're well over 1,000 kilometres from Adelaide, which is our capital city. So we're pretty isolated. We're up there. The size of our station, we have about 1 million acres, so 404,000 odd hectares. And I don't know where all you guys are logging in from, but that's roughly 1.5 times the size of the Australian Capital Territory. So it might seem pretty big, but in the whole scheme of things, where we live in our part of the world, we're actually one of the smaller properties around. So we have a beef cattle operation because we're north of what's called the dog fence in South Australia and New South Wales. There's a fence that's meant to keep all the wild dogs out of the southern country to keep the sheep protected. So we only run cattle up here. And in an ordinary year, we'd run around 5,000 head of Charbray breeders. And the Charbray, if you're not certain what that is, that's a Charolais Brahman cross. And we can talk more about why we chose that breed later on, if you'd like to ask us. And we aim to turn off around 1,500 head of weaners a year. So turn off means sell on to someone else. But the thing about that is that we've been in drought for 5 years. So it makes it really, really hard to carry on your normal business. So we've been focusing on keeping our core breeder herd, so keeping all our cows alive as well as we can when there's very little rainfall. So does anyone have any questions about that so far, or would you just like me to keep talking?
I can keep talking. Keep going there.
And talking's not a problem.
We'll have plenty of time for questions later on. It's all good.
Yeah. No worries. I just have to try and I'll click the wrong thing. Okay, so who lives and works here on the station? We're a small family-owned operation. There's just my husband and I, our 3 kids. 2 of them are here with us at the moment, and the eldest one, as you can probably see from the picture, I'm guessing he's about your age. He is at boarding school in about 800 kilometres away in another town. So he only comes home for school holidays now. So we go weeks and weeks without seeing him. And we've got a worker called Donnie, a local Indigenous man. And he's lived and worked in this area his whole life. And my in-laws, so my husband's parents. So they hang around and do most of the management type stuff with us as well. So it's a pretty lonely a lot of the time. We don't have heaps of friends around, and we're pretty isolated. So what is it like living here in the middle of Australia? So temperatures can be really, really extreme. We can get down to about -6 in winter, which makes working outside a bit of a challenge. at times, I can tell you. I don't like going outside in the cold. And it can get up to about 47 degrees in summer. So we've got a huge range of temperatures to deal with. Luckily, the environment is well suited to it. It's very adaptable. Our grass and our feed stands up quite well to those temperatures, and the cattle handle it quite well. And it's also very isolated here. We don't have mobile phone coverage on the station. We do have satellite internet, but that's only at the house. We don't have internet coverage over the whole station. We've got what you might call a corner store, so like a servo / takeaway pub sort of thing, 75 kilometres away on a dirt road. And our nearest supermarket is in Alice Springs, so it's 450 kilometres away. Now, we usually get 200 millimetres of rain per year, but for the past 5 years, we've only had an average of around 50 millimetres per year. So things are starting to look pretty dry. We've had not a bad start to the season, so we've had not a bad amount of rain so far, but we're really looking forward to some more rain over summer. So you might wonder, how do we do our school, and what happens if we get sick or if we need to see the doctor? So as I've already said, Alan, my eldest, goes to boarding school 800 kilometres away, and the other kids do School of the Air through Alice Springs. So Stephen, the middle child, he'll come over and wave hello to you all. And so he's in grade 4. So he does sort of like what we're doing now with his teacher. He does online lessons, and for the rest of the day, I have to supervise him doing his schoolwork. So that's where I personally spend most of my days, in the schoolroom teaching the kids, while Mark's out on the station doing all the hard working stuff. And if we get sick or hurt, we have the Royal Flying Doctor Service. So we make a phone call to them and have what's called a phone consult. And if it's serious, they'll send an aeroplane to come and pick us up and take us to hospital, either in Alice Springs, Port Augusta or Adelaide. But if it's not so serious, we have what's called a flying doctor box. So that's like a chemist in a box. So the doctor will diagnose us over the phone and tell us, you need to get XYZ out of the flying doctor box and take it this many times. And yeah, that's what we do if we're sick. If we're really too sick to ring the flying doctor, but not sick enough to get a fly out, we'll often drive to our local clinic, which is 75 kilometres away, where they have a couple of nurses, so they can take a look at you in person. So what do we do all day? It's really the most important thing. The key thing that we do all day is making sure that the cattle have fresh water to drink and food to eat. So our whole job revolves around animal welfare and animal husbandry. So to keep our cattle in top condition, we feed a mineral supplement, which contains a lot of different things, all the trace minerals, vitamins, all those sorts of things. And it's got molasses in it as well, which the cattle love. It's like sugar for cattle. They just go mad for it. And it also contains something called urea, which helps stimulate the activity in their gut and allows them to break down more fibrous matter and extract more protein from it. So that allows them to eat things that you might not think a cow would eat. So they eat a lot of shrubbery. We have here, what keeps us going through the drought is when all the grass is gone, we have what they like to call the living haystack. So we've got large stands of mulga trees. And with the added urea and the vitamin supplements, the cattle do quite well on mulga. They like to browse on it and graze it, and they do really well. And at least 3 times a year, we muster the cattle to wean and bring in the calves. So weaning, I'm not sure if you're all in ag classes, if you know what weaning is. So weaning is you separate the teenager type cattle away from their mothers, and so they can go off and live their own lives and leave the mothers alone for a break, and sell anything that's ready for market. So we'll sell on to other people who take our weaners and then they fatten them and sell them on to places like Woolworths and Coles. That's where a lot of our cattle end up, in the supermarket. We don't personally sell anything overseas. We don't do live export. We sell everything domestically. But after we sell them to someone else, we don't know where they might end up. But also our older cattle that need to be removed from the herd, we sell them to a meatworks in Victoria, and they usually end up in a hamburger in America, which seems a bit a bit of a long-winded way to go around making a McDonald's patty in America, but it actually works in quite well because America has a lot of really fatty beef that's fed in feedlots. So to make a really nice hamburger patty, you need that bit drier, more robust tasting meat. So that's where our older cattle end up. So how do we do the mustering? This is what a lot of you might be interested in, because this is, if you've been watching the ABC recently, the Outback Ringer show, I'm sure that's all very exciting. We don't go quite that hard. We try to keep our cattle a bit more quiet and domesticated than the ferals they muster up in the top end. But we've got a gyrocopter. So Mark, my husband, he's a pilot. He will fly this machine around in the sky and tell us who are on the ground in our little machines or on our motorbikes where they are, and we'll come in behind the cattle, pick them up, shape them up into a nice mob, and walk them gently, quietly to the yards. I know it looks like heaps of fun, but chasing your cattle around the scrub like mad things is really not a great idea if you want to have nice, quiet cattle to work with, because you have to remember the things that you're chasing around the yards, sooner or later you're going to have to get into a pen with them, and you want to have them as nice and calm and quiet as possible. And you might wonder what other animals we've got here. So we have a variety of pets. Some of them might be a bit unusual compared to what you might have at home. So we've got a cattle dog, of course. His name's Tiny. He is probably the most useless cattle dog in Australia. He's absolutely no good at working stock at all. So he's just a house pet. He just hangs around and does a bit of whatever. We've got the usual, of course, horses and ponies and those sorts of things for pets. And this is, you can see here on the screen, Peppy. He's my daughter's pony. He is very naughty. He likes to come in the house if he gets the opportunity, which is not great. We've got camels, because we also have a lot of feral camels here. We're trying very hard to get them under control because they are very destructive and cause a lot of damage to your infrastructure and the environment. But occasionally you'll pick up a baby one and it's just too cute, and so you end up hand raising it, and then you end up with a pet camel, which is about, what, 600 kgs? Yeah, about 600, 700 kgs of pet that wants to follow you around, which can get very nerve-wracking at times. And here we've got one of our pet bullocks called Fiat. So we found him underneath our bulldozer, which is a Fiat brand bulldozer, and usually we don't keep cattle with horns. We either cut their horns off when they're calves or make sure that they're tipped at least. But Fiat is what you might describe as a gentle giant. He's a very lovely boy. Even at this size, he still comes up for a pat in the paddock. Mainly because we've got the molasses, which he is addicted to. And so, yeah, he's an interesting fellow to keep around. So you might be interested in what's happening in the beef industry in Australia at the moment. All things considered, we're not doing too badly. There's been a big uptick in the purchase of red meat during the lockdown period. So that's really something to be proud of, I guess. So here I've got some facts for you. So if you're looking for any other more information, log on to the MLA website. All of the reports, any of the facts, you'll find at MLA. So Meat and Livestock Australia is what we call our RD&A corporation. So Research, Development and Adoption Corporation. So as beef cattle producers and sheep and goat as well, we pay a levy every time we sell or buy an animal. And that levy gets paid to the government, which then splits it up amongst our different organisations that we use to manage our industry. So Meat and Livestock Australia, this is producer owned, I guess you could call it, and producer led. And it works solely for the purpose of developing technology and researching different things for the red meat industry of Australia. And we pay for that ourselves. There's no taxpayer dollars go into that. And that's what all of our scientific research and stuff, well, a lot of it, some of it is done by private enterprise, but the producers say to MLA, this is the stuff we want you to focus on. Please investigate this for us, and they will invest in that and develop new technologies and new methods for us, which is really, really helpful to have a industry organised body like that that can help solve issues that you might be having in the industry. Now, I know there's been a lot recently in the news about beef and the environment and red meat and the environment, and how, you know, methane could be possibly impacting on the environment. And to be completely honest, every industry in the world has an impact on the environment. Even humans living in their houses, minding their own business, are impacting the environment. And because we work so closely within the environment, we as farmers and producers have a really vested interest in making sure that the environment is healthy, because if the environment's not healthy, then we're not going to make any money and we lose our jobs in our homes. So we're doing the best that we can to try and look after the environment, not just for ourselves, but for everyone else, because you can see here on the screen, we manage half of Australia's land mass. So when you think about that, that's a pretty big responsibility for a group of individuals to look after half of Australia on behalf of everyone else, and still try and make money out of it so that we all still have somewhere to live. So we are doing heaps of work on that, especially with MLA. And we also have a thing called the Sustainable Australian Beef Framework. So that's like a report card for the red meat industry, or for the beef industry. And it sets out what we think is important, what things we're doing at the moment to address those issues, and how far we've come since we first started the framework in 2017. So if you're interested, jump on there and have a look, and you'll be able to see the gains that we're making and the investments that we're making in helping manage this huge environment that is Australia. We've got producers in Tasmania and the top end of Australia, and in the centre, in the desert. So we've got so many different land types and land masses to look after that, you know, it's impossible to make one rule to fit everyone. So we've got to try and manage it the best that we can, and still help people live and work where they do. So some of you might be interested in coming along and working on a cattle station, and it can be really exciting, and it also can be really hard work and really boring. Depends on what you're doing at the time. So the day-to-day stuff where you're checking water troughs and you're putting out lick and you're checking fences, that can be quite monotonous, I guess, and in the extreme temperatures it can be quite challenging. But if you don't mind being by yourself, if you enjoy your own company, if you like being outside, I really like it. I'm not a big fan of crowds, don't really like people that much. So I like being out here by myself most of the time. I think it's good fun. You get to be out in the environment and nature. Yeah, looking after other animals. So I've got here some what I think are key attributes, not so much what skills you need, but what sort of personal attributes you might need. So the first thing is you have to really like being outside, because if you're going to get on the ground floor on a cattle station, yeah, outside is where it's at. That's where all the work happens. It's not until you get up into a management type level that you end up spending most of your time in front of the computer, which some people might argue is pretty boring anyway. And you have to be able to take responsibility for yourself and the animals. So it's not just yourself you have to look after. You're there to look after the animals as well. So it's like having 5,000 toddlers that you have to make sure are not stuck in things, that they're eating and drinking and they're in the right place at the right time, and that they're all staying healthy. So you need to be able to take direction, which is, we might sound like we're being really bossy, but at the start and end of everything is your welfare and your safety. And if we tell you to do something a certain way, there's a really, really good reason for that. We don't want you to get hurt, because we look after you the same way that you're here looking after the cows. And, you know, you have to be able to take a bit of a joke, because at the end of the day, you can't take it too seriously. Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone will do something silly. We like to call it the stupid tax. I've had quite a few recently. I dropped my phone in my Mixmaster and bent my iPhone in half. Rubbed my face with chili after cooking tea. Pardon me. But you have to be able to accept that everyone makes mistakes, and sooner or later, you're going to have a joke about it.
That's a big one. Being able to joke about it afterwards, it's pretty important. End of the day stuff.
Yeah. At the end of the day, everyone can have a debrief and a chill out, have a joke, and the next day you start over fresh again. You have to be not afraid to ask questions. And this is a really important thing, because if you don't understand what you're doing and why, there's a really good chance that it won't get done correctly. So you have to be able to ask questions, not just accept blindly, because once you understand how something is done and why, then that's where is the room for innovation and for collaboration, because we're always looking for fresh ideas and fresh way to do things, like work smarter, not harder. If you understand why and how we're doing things, then you can say, well, what about this? Have you ever considered this? And we may have considered it, but working on a cattle station is a collaborative thing. It's not a like, I'm the boss and you're my servant, you must do what I say. It's about everyone working together to achieve that outcome of keeping the cattle healthy with good welfare outcomes and keeping the people healthy and safe. And if we can all work together towards those aims, then it can be a lot of fun. And you've got to be not afraid to have a go. This picture here is me with my arm stuck up a cow's rear end. That's the first time I've done that. And I did that at a field day event in front of about 50 people. So sometimes it's going to be messy and dirty, but I'm not just doing it for fun, by the way. That's part of a preg testing, part of a preg testing thing. So look out, I'm actually using an ultrasound device to preg test a cow to look at her uterus. So yeah, that's not just something that we do for fun. We don't just wander around poking our hands up cows' bottoms. That's not cool, and will get you kicked very quickly. So we don't do that. So yeah, and there's always something to learn, always a new skill to learn, and a lot of it is physical skill. So you have to be prepared to get in there and literally get your hands dirty. And probably for us, frustratingly and most importantly, you have to be able to drive a manual motor vehicle. Cattle stations don't have a lot of automatic cars. They don't exist because of many different reasons, but you need to be able to drive a manual car, and you need to know north, south, east and west and how to read a map, because you're talking about something that's bigger than the Australian Capital Territory. You will get lost if you can't read a map or take directions. You have to know where the sun comes up and where the sun goes down. You have to be able to do that. That is something that is so important. And I've got a little list here for you of where you can look if you're interested in working on a cattle station. Some of them are private companies, but Central Station and Ringers from the Top End, you'll also find them on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter. They're really good follows if you're looking getting into the far north beef cattle industry. The Ringers from the Top End and the Central Station people, both good groups of people, really happy and excited to help young people get into the industry, and you can make some really good connections through there. So if you're not interested in going to what we call a big company place, where it's owned by a big company or a corporation and there's lots of different ways that they operate, if you're more interested in going to a family place that's family owned and operated and you get a bit more personalised experience, Ringers from the Top End and Central Station will be able to connect you with those people. And you can build a relationship with them now before you're going out looking for a job. You know, you might be able to spend some holiday time out there, or find somewhere that's a bit closer to home to spend some holiday time. Find out if it is really for you, which it's not for everyone, and that's fine. There's so many different jobs in agriculture these days that it's not just being outside all day, every day. We need people to support us to do our job. We need animal health experts. We need rural supply stores. We need agronomists. We need dietitians. We need transport operators. Good truck drivers are impossible to find. It's ridiculous trying to find someone who's dedicated to hauling stock, because it is a really complex, really unusual type of job. And it's something that it's a vocation. It's a calling to do a lot of this work in agriculture. We need understanding agricultural bankers. We need people who are interested in technology and computers. We need all sorts in agriculture, but it doesn't hurt to get out there and experience in the field firsthand. And it also doesn't hurt when you've had that experience in the field and then you enter the ag industry, maybe in a different way through finance or technology. And you can say, oh yes, I have worked on a cattle station actually, because you know, you never know who you're going to come up against. when you're trying to make your way out there in the world. So it gives you a little bit of credibility. So that's all the pictures I've got. So anyone have any questions or want to know anything else more about where we live, what we do? Yeah, we're open for questions or for more information.
Okay, does anyone have any questions? If you do, please put them into the chat area on Zoom. Have you got any more slides there, Gillian?
No, that's the last
Right.
one.
Can I ask you to stop sharing your screen?
Yep. Yes, there we go. I figured it out.
Excellent.
Okay, so we've got a question already. How do we protect animals from the heat? The animals protect themselves from the heat. We've got a lot of tree cover over the whole station. So they will monitor and regulate their own temperature. When they're really, really hot, they'll go and stand in the shade and utilize their natural physiology of what cows do. So they're ruminating through a lot of the day anyway, which involves laying down in a shady place. But if you've ever had anything to do with sheep are a little bit different, to put it politely. Sheep will lay out in the middle of a paddock even if there's a lot of shade available, because sheep are sheep and animals are animals. They will make their own choices regardless of what you think is best for them. But all you can do really to have good welfare outcomes for them is provide them with the fresh, clean water in adequate volume and the shade and the feed. And at the end of the day, they have to then make their own choices to access that when they need it.
We do a lot of, when we're setting up new water points for the cattle, we try and make sure that the watering points are close to possible to good shade areas where the cattle want to camp anyway. So for us, it's an infrastructure thing, and making sure that if there is good tree cover, open waters and dams and stuff, that we do what we can to maintain that coverage around those water points.
Okay, and so Leonie has asked why Charbres. So we've got a really soft spot for Charbres. When we're originally from Queensland, so we moved down to South Australia about 17 years ago, and we brought our entire cattle herd with us. So that was about what, 3,000 head?
Yeah.
So we trucked 3,000 head of cattle from Queensland to South Australia, so we didn't lose our breeders that we've been working on for decades. So with a Charolais, you've got the good attributes of being fast growing, nicely muscled, nice soft appearance, so they go well in the southern markets. They mature quickly, so you're getting that aspect of reaching joining weight earlier, and the steers mature earlier so you can eat them earlier. But then you need the Brahman in them when you're living in a harsh environment. So it's called hybrid vigor. So you're crossing two different breeds together to get the good attributes of both. Brahmans are very tolerant to disease, pests and heat, which we're quite lucky living in an isolated area where it's quite hot. We don't have a lot of disease. We don't have a lot of pests. We don't have ticks. We don't have buffalo fly. So that also reduces a lot of our input costs. So we don't have to spray for buffalo fly or spray for ticks. Reduces a lot of our chemical input. And we also don't have like foot rot or bovine yonis or anything like that. So we're quite lucky that we are pretty low input costs, which is good because we live a long way from anywhere. So freight is one of our biggest outputs.
Yeah, freight averages about 25% of our gross income for cattle goes in freight. So compared to other ag industries closer to the settled areas, we're probably fairly off the charts with that percentage.
Mm.
And yeah, and we like the Charbres. We like the white colour. We believe that the lighter colours handle the heat better. We haven't done any scientific studies on that, of course, but that's just our personal belief and that's our personal preference. And when you see the little tiny Charbres calves with their little white faces and their little fluffy tails, like, you just have to love them. They're just so
easier
cute.
to find in aeroplane as well.
Yeah, they stand out better against the red ground than a red cow does. So they're a lot easier to spot from the air.
All right, do we have any other questions from our participants today? I've got a question. So,
Yep.
what technology is used more and more on farms these days? What can you tell us a little bit more about the different types of technologies that you use to manage your property?
It's interesting when we refer to technology, and a lot of the ag tech space has become sort of very high tech. So talking about satellite imagery and all this sort of stuff. But for us, ag tech is becoming more and more about practical applications of existing technology. So we are transitioning from windmills and diesel pumps to solar bores and solar generated power. For example, here at the station, we are completely 100% on solar power now. We've got a really big, it's called a RAPS unit, remote area power system, 100% solar. Most of our water points now pump water with solar generated power. And looking at things that when we get a bit better internet connectivity up here, we'll be looking at doing things like remote telemetry and monitoring of bores and water points and those sorts of things. So yeah, in the beef cattle space, there is a lot of exciting developments happening about autonomous walkover weighing. So that's a system where when the cattle come in to get a drink, they're weighed. And so they're drafted automatically without having any human intervention at all. So that's another way to reduce your labour input and also to reduce the stress on the cattle because they're not being forced through, they're just walking through gently at their own pace. And with the lack of labour, especially in remote areas, we need to start thinking about how we can do things more efficiently with less people. And so we've got a question here about what types of grasses are on our property. So that's you, Mark.
Yeah, well, in our what we call our open areas, so our rangeland areas, we have predominantly Mitchell grass and Flinders grass, which are probably two of the most common grasses through Central Australia, right from Central Queensland right through. But in amongst that, there is probably about 100 or 150 different types of edible low plants, sort of grass type plants that grow depending on whether we get winter rain or summer rain, or and that's one of the reasons we believe that the rangeland beef is so good, is because there is that enormous variety of plants. And even in the same area of our property, the type of plants that grow from year to year will change dramatically depending on when our rain falls or how much rain falls. So, and then when the grass, over time, the grass doesn't last, being like an annual type plant. And if we are without rain for a long time, the cattle then do have to go to some of the low shrubs and also some of the lower leaves of the mulga trees, which is a type of acacia that is reasonably palatable for cattle if you help their rumen along with a few right minerals and vitamins and stuff. So that's about it.
So is anyone going to come for a gap year?
I think it'd be fantastic. It'd be a fantastic experience to be out in the middle of Australia in a really totally different environment, totally different climate, and I think it'd be a great experience for young people to engage and understand the diversity of agriculture in Australia. And this is what it's all about today, because we've got presentations from all over Australia, and it really demonstrates how diverse agriculture is in Australia, and every different climate and every different circumstance has a different set of production challenges, production systems, ways in which everything's managed. And that really gives us a real insight on how fantastic we are in Australia with such a variety of industries. And maybe, you know, how do you cope with the isolation, being where you are? How do you do you have social connections? Where do you go out to have, you know, to meet up with friends and that sort of thing? How does all that happen?
I'm not a big socializing type person, which I guess this is why it suits me so much here. When I have to go to the city for meetings and things, it does make me quite anxious. So I don't enjoy crowds, to put it politely, but social media has been a godsend for me. I've got a lot of friends all over Australia and all over the world that are very they're in ag, they're not in ag, but we have a lot in common. Yes, I really enjoy social media. So that's where I get my social media fix from. And, if you're going to take on a job being a ringer on one of the northern cattle stations, a lot of them are more like small towns. They might have up to 50 employees living and working on the station. So you're never alone when you're up on one of those big corporate places. It's because it's a different production system to what we have, and they do things differently. So they need more people. So we've got another question here. So where do we sell our cattle to an export market? So we don't do live ex. We don't send live export because the Charolais content makes them unsuited to going into Northern Australia and north into Indonesia, because they need to, if cattle are going north up closer to the equator, they need to have what is called clean ears. They can't have fluffy hair in their ears because of the insects and that sort of thing. They can't have, they must have a clean pizzle. So the sheath around the penis area must not be all fluffy and be able to collect bugs and that. So it's just it's an animal health issue. You can't send fluffy cattle up into the north of Australia or up into Indonesia, into Asia. We sell our cattle usually on to other farmers, people who have grown too much crop, or people who grow hay, and then they will then fatten them and then sell them on to a meatworks to go, or if we're selling breeders. So if we're selling female cattle, other people will buy our cows and breed out of them and build their own herds.
This year, because it's been quite dry, we've been selling our cattle off a little bit smaller than normal, and almost exclusively they've been going into New South Wales, where they're recovering from drought as well. And a lot of guys are buying them in quite big numbers from us. And so when those weaners get bigger, they will then, the better of the breeders will probably then get resold on to be like lifetime breeders for those guys, and the males will be fed on to become feedlot cattle or lots of other things. So this year particularly, that part of very northern Victoria and New South Wales have bought pretty much every animal we've sold this year through different agents over in that area. So it's been quite good.
That's why it's important that all of Australia needs to get regular rainfall. So if we're producing something, someone else can buy it.
Yeah.
So we can't keep them here forever. No. So Leonie's class has asked, what age and weight do we wean the calves? So that depends. In a good season where we've had plenty of rain and the cow, because it's about managing cow and calf nutrition. So we need to look after the cow because she's the one we're going to keep here forever. So if we're managing her condition and monitoring her fat score and everything like that. So in a good year, they can stay with their mother a little bit longer. And then when we wean them, we supplement feed the calves and they get additional nutrition through hay and a special feed mix. But generally, the worse the season, the smaller and younger we will wean to maintain the cow health. Because we're getting advances in technology in feeding and animal nutrition have meant that we can wean down quite small these days and still maintain the health of the calf as well as the cow.
It's very important too that when the seasonal conditions are bad, it becomes a lot harder for the cow to put the right amounts of minerals and nutrients into her milk for the calf. So in a lot of cases, when you can remove those weaners, small weaners, and you can then give them the right food with exactly what they need, it will actually be better for them than trying to survive on the milk their mother has. So we don't like doing it. We prefer to have our weaners bigger and directly off mum, nice and healthy. But some years when it doesn't rain, we have to make some management decisions.
So we'd be generally looking at what they'd be 3 months, 4 months old when we wean?
Anywhere from 3 to 6. We like to get 3 to 6, and we would ideally like to have them off their mother by about 250 kilos, 250 to 300 kilos maximum. But in some years it can be as low as 180 kilos, 150 kilos even, average weight of the weaners when they come off. But those smaller weight ones then require a much more attention to detail with their feeding after they come off mum, to make sure those levels of nutrients and stuff stay where they should be.
And it's also important to remember when you're doing like intensive feeding. So if you're weaning earlier and you're having cattle in hand, so in yards, then you need to look a lot closer at animal health and biosecurity and disease management and those sorts of things, because it's just a fact of life. When you squeeze a lot of things into a small space and they're all peeing and pooping everywhere in the same space, you have to make sure that your hygiene is really important, that their water is really, really clean, that their food sources are really, really clean, and making sure that you're giving them the exact right diet that they need to stay healthy. And if there's a sick animal or if anything looks like it's going wrong, you need to address that issue immediately, because it can get out of hand and be a disaster if you don't. So it's really, once you start looking at confinement feeding and intensive livestock handling, it becomes a whole different ball game. Generally, if things are going well, the cattle are out in the paddock minding their own business, living as they were thousands of years ago, I guess you could say. They're doing very well. But when the more people interfere, the closer we have to watch to make sure that they all stay healthy. So would you guys like to tell us in the chat box where you're from, so we know who we're talking to and what sort of areas that you're in? You might have bought some of our cattle in a hamburger one day, or from your local Woolies or something.
That's true. That's very true. I have a question. So a lot of farms these days, they diversify. They've got multiple enterprises to deal with the good and bad times. And obviously your conditions there means that your main enterprise is cattle production. Do you look at are you looking at maybe diversifying into other enterprises or cropping or anything like that?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because this drought has forced us into a bit of diversification. Mark's parents have just bought a farm in the Flinders Ranges, so that's about, 900 kilometres south? About 850 kilometres away, where they grow hay under irrigation. So that is a huge learning curve for us. We have had nothing to do with that whatsoever our whole lives. So we're basically starting from scratch. But agriculture is a pretty inclusive community. So we've moved down there with this new operation. Oh, Columba Catholic College. I used to go there. We both used to go to school there at Mount Carmel when it was Mount Carmel. So there you go. My aunt, Althea Norton, was the principal there for some years. You will find both of us probably, maybe not Mark, because he was probably not one of the best behaved kids at school. I was in Cattle Club at Mount Carmel. There you go. Say hello to everyone there for me. Isn't that amazing? I probably know some of the kids in the classes. I probably know their parents. Went to school with them as well, because I used to live in Richmond.
Fantastic.
And Erbray, I do know someone from Erbray High School as well. So that's excellent. See, agriculture is a small world.
It is.
We know everyone.
Indeed. So pretty soon you'll be producing your own feed, and will that be an enterprise where you'll sell that feed on? Will you use any of it on your current property with your animals?
At the moment we're stockpiling it there predominantly and using some of it. We haven't got a lot of sort of cattle work left to do here this year because of the heat. So I've got a bit of hay on hand enough for the rest of this year. What we're doing though is, as I'm doing the cattle work, some of the older cows are going down to the farm, we call it, and the hay and that's being kept down there so that they can be fed up. And a lot of them are still quite good cows, but with their age, they're struggling to handle the conditions here over the last few years. So we'll try and find them a bit easier life somewhere else, hopefully. And it's also growing grain there as well. So theoretically, at least there'll be some grain growing there for income and fodder growing for there and for here. So, and also for somewhere for the cattle when they leave here, they'll go there first, where they can get unload off the truck and have a few weeks, up to 6 weeks or 8 weeks even, on some nice soft ground, and then they can go to market in usually New South Wales or Victoria.
And
Fantastic.
we don't just say, you know, you have to be prepared to try new things. We are trying new things. It's probably not as expensive as doing something different on the station, but you know, this hay growing, grain growing enterprise is a steep learning curve for us, I can assure you.
I'm
So
sure.
yeah, we've never spent so much time in a tractor, I can tell you.
Well, I think that's the big point, especially about National Ag Day, is to identify that, you know, farming is very complex, and farmers are constantly changing and learning what they do and improving the way they produce their products, and looking forward into the future and to where we're going. And I think that's a really important point about how we can sort of improve the understanding of, especially our city cousins who don't have that insight and don't really understand what happens on a farm, and they may have a very, you know, one-sided view, and the typical, you know, farmer on a John Deere tractor who's about 65 years old. And really, that's what National Ag Day is all about. It's getting that big perspective about you know, understanding that it's such a diverse range of different farming organisations, and farming is a business. You know, that's really what it comes down to. It's a very complex, busy type of business, and a very rewarding. You know, and yourselves, how inspiring you are in terms of your story and how you are in your current location with what you do. And you know, that's a message that we need to get all over the place to everybody.
Yeah. And ag is so diverse. There's room in agriculture for everyone. For whatever skill set you've got, there is a job here waiting for you to do. And you could even come into ag and make your own job, because there's so many areas that we get so focused on our small area that we're probably missing things. And you just need to identify that gap, and you can fit into it, and you can innovate. And, you know, because farmers, like, we get a bit of a bad rap for being very traditional and being very stuck in our ways. But the truth is, if we didn't innovate, we wouldn't survive.
Yep.
So being able to innovate is part of being able to grow. And that's what we're really good at.
Farmers are some of the best innovators in the whole world. There's no doubt about it.
I think the other very important thing too for us, because my family particularly has been involved in agriculture for a very, very long time. And for us, it's always been the case that our family business has also always been our family home as well. And I think a lot of times that gets lost a bit, that, you know, it's all these big corporate farms or whatever you want to call them, but there are an awful lot of people like us out there who, our home is also our business, and it's where our animals live. And, you know what I mean? It's absolutely integrated into every part of your life. And I've grown up with that. So for me, it's not strange, but for other people looking from the outside, it's like, oh, everything's tied up in one piece of land effect. Well, yes, actually it is. So we're pretty keen to look after that piece of land for the next generation, one after that, and after that. So.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Any other questions from any other participants today? It looks like we've got a wide variety of students from a range of different parts of Australia, especially at Frensham. Great school down at Mittagong.
And we're also, if you're on Instagram, if your parents are allowing you on Instagram, I won't say jump on there by yourselves, get your parents' permission first. There are a lot of different station accounts and farming accounts to follow on Instagram that are really interesting and show a lot of different areas of the production cycle and of the chain, of the supply chain. We're on there at Station Life 101. So you can jump on there for a follow if you want. And and ring us from the top end, Central Station. And if you're more interested in the intensive type stuff, the Future Farmers Network is a really good supportive group of people. And they're really, doing great things for young people in ag.
Fantastic. That's some really good ways of connecting with other farmers and yourself. That's great. Well, I'd like to thank Mark and Gillian today, because it was so good to get your story and understand a lot about what happens in your world. And again, you know, it's all about the diversity of agriculture in Australia today on National Ag Day. And we really appreciate you spending your time with us today and sharing your story. And it's been wonderful. And thanks to all the participants for joining in the session today, all the classrooms. It's been sensational. So we've got 3 more sessions happening today. And the next one will start at 1 o'clock Australian Eastern Daylight Saving Time. But thanks, everyone. Thanks so much for your presentation today. And thanks for joining in on National Ag Day with Farmer Time and Primary Industries Education Foundation. Thanks, everybody.
No worries. Thank you. Bye.